Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper that brings a whole room to its knees. Gavin Reynolds thought the divorce was his victory lap. He thought stripping his ex-wife of her home, her confidence, and her dignity was the end of the story. When he saw her standing alone at the biggest gala of the year, he saw an opportunity to destroy her one last time in front of Chicago's elite. But Gavin forgot one thing. You never know who is watching, and he certainly didn't know that the man standing behind her owns the very ground Gavin walks on. This is the story of how a public humiliation turned into the most satisfying engagement reveal in history. The invitation weighed 3 ounces. It was cream-colored cardstock, edged in gold leaf, with the calligraphy embossed so deeply you could feel the ridges of the letters with your eyes closed. The Sterling Foundation requests the honor of your presence. Sarah Mitchell sat at her cramped kitchen table, the kind made of particle board that wobbled if you leaned on it too hard. The fluorescent light of her studio apartment in the Rogers Park neighborhood of Chicago buzzed overhead, a stark contrast to the sprawling lakefront penthouse she had shared with Gavin just 8 months ago. She ran her thumb over the name on the envelope. Miss Sarah Mitchell. Not Mrs. Gavin Reynolds. Gavin had been thorough. That was the word everyone used to describe Gavin Reynolds. Thorough. When he managed a merger, he didn't just buy the company. He gutted the culture and installed his own. When he managed their divorce, he didn't just leave her, he dismantled her reality. "You're an art restorer, Sarah," he had sneered during their final mediation, checking his Rolex Submariner as if her heartbreak was wasting his billable hours. "You fix old, broken things. You don't build anything. I build futures. Without me, you're just paint drying on a wall." He had hidden assets. He had hired a shark of a lawyer named Benedict Cole, a man who allegedly had dirt on half the judges in Cook County. Sarah left the marriage with her grandmother's ring, her beat-up 2018 Honda Civic, and a settlement that barely covered the rent on this studio. But she had her work. And unbeknownst to Gavin, she had a new client. The phone buzzed. It was a text from an unlisted number. "The car will be there at 7 p.m. Please don't be late. N." Sarah took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a mixture of adrenaline and dread. Going to the Sterling Gala was suicide for her social anxiety. Gavin would be there. Everyone from her old life would be there. The wives who stopped calling the day the divorce papers were filed, the husbands who treated her like a piece of furniture Gavin had discarded. She looked at the dress hanging on the back of her door. It wasn't designer. It wasn't Versace or Armani, brands Gavin used to force her to wear so he looked like a successful provider. It was vintage, a 1950s midnight blue silk gown she had found in an estate sale and restored herself. She had mended the tears, re-beaded the bodice with microscopic precision, and tailored it to fit her frame like a second skin. It was beautiful. It was her. "You can do this, Sarah," she whispered to the empty room. "You aren't his victim anymore." But as she applied her lipstick, a shade of deep crimson, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to be a battlefield. She just didn't realize that she was walking into an ambush. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton was a cavern of gold and crystal. The ceiling frescoes, which Sarah had actually written a thesis on in college, were obscured by the sheer volume of wealth in the room. The air smelled of expensive lilies, truffles, and the distinct metallic scent of old money. Sarah stepped out of the hired Lincoln town car, not the Rolls-Royce she expected, but she preferred the subtlety, and made her way up the carpet. She kept her head high. The midnight blue dress caught the light, shimmering like the surface of Lake Michigan at night. She hadn't been inside for 5 minutes before she felt the eyes. It wasn't the appreciative glances of strangers. It was the sharp, judgmental stares of people who knew the gossip. "Is that Sarah?" she heard a woman whisper. It was Caroline Vance, the wife of one of Gavin's partners. "I thought she moved back to Ohio or wherever she came from. Look at that dress. Is that second-hand?" Sarah tightened her grip on her clutch. "Just find him," she told herself. Find Nathaniel, say hello, and get out. She was scanning the room for her host when a shadow fell over her, a shadow she knew better than her own. I didn't realize they were selling tickets to the general public this year. The voice was smooth, baritone, and laced with arsenic. Sarah froze. She turned slowly to face Gavin Reynolds. He looked impeccable, unfortunately. He was wearing a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, the peak lapels sharp enough to cut glass. But he wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was a woman who looked like she had been manufactured in a lab designed to irritate ex-wives. She was young, perhaps 24, blonde, statuesque, and wearing a dress that cost more than Sarah's entire year of rent. This was Tiffany, the consultant Gavin had hired 2 months before the separation. "Hello, Gavin," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Sarah," Gavin said, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked her up and down, making a show of inspecting her attire. Interesting choice. Vintage? Or just old? Tiffany giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Gav, be nice. Maybe it's a costume." "I'm here as a guest, Gavin," Sarah said, turning to leave. "Enjoy your evening." Wait, Gavin stepped in front of her, blocking her path. He swirled his scotch, the ice clinking against the glass. He wanted this. He needed this. Gavin was currently closing a deal with a Japanese tech conglomerate, and he was high on power. Seeing Sarah here, looking dignified, annoyed him. He needed her to be broken to validate his own success. "I'm just curious," Gavin said, raising his voice slightly, enough to attract the attention of the circle of investors nearby. "How did you get in? Did you sneak in through the catering entrance? I know things are tight, Sarah. If you needed a hot meal, you could have just emailed my assistant. I do pro bono work." The circle around them tightened. People love a spectacle, especially when it involves someone else's humiliation. "I was invited," Sarah said quietly. "Invited?" Gavin laughed. It was a barking, cruel sound. "By whom? The janitorial staff? Sarah, look around you." He gestured expansively to the room. "This is the Sterling Gala. Tickets are $5,000 a plate. The people here are titans of industry. You fix cracks in old paintings. You don't belong here." "I think you should leave," Tiffany added, her voice sickly sweet. "It's embarrassing. For you." The noise in the immediate vicinity had died down. A hush spread outward from their circle like ripples in a pond. Gavin Reynolds was making a scene, and in Chicago high society, a scene was currency. Sarah felt the heat rising in her cheeks. This was her nightmare. The feeling of being small, of being worthless, the feeling Gavin had cultivated in her for 6 years. "I'm not leaving," Sarah said, though her voice wavered. Gavin stepped closer, invading her personal space. He lowered his voice, but it was a stage whisper, designed to be overheard. "Sarah, stop this. You're making a fool of yourself. Look at you. You're wearing a rag. You're drinking the free champagne because you can't afford a bottle of water. It's pathetic." He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a money clip. It was thick with cash. "You want a handout? Is that it?" Gavin peeled off $300 bills. He held them out to her, his eyes dead and cold. "Here, take it. Go get a taxi. Go to a diner. Just get out of my sight. You're ruining the aesthetic of the evening." The cruelty was so absolute it was almost breathless. Caroline Vance, standing nearby, gasped, but she didn't step in. No one stepped in. They watched. They were the audience, and Gavin was the ringmaster. Sarah looked at the money. For a split second, she thought about taking it and throwing it in his face, but that's what the old Sarah would have done. Gotten emotional, cried, caused a scene that would make her look like the crazy one. "I don't want your money, Gavin," she said. "Then what do you want?" Gavin sneered. "Validation? You won't find it here. You're a surplus requirement, Sarah. You're the rough draft. Tiffany here." "No," he squeezed the young woman's waist. is the final product. Actually, a deep, resonant voice cut through the tension like a broadsword. I believe she's waiting for me. The crowd parted. Walking through the gap wasn't just a guest. It was the guest. Nathaniel Sterling was 42 years old, standing 6'3" with salt and pepper hair and eyes that were famously described by Forbes magazine as unsettlingly perceptive. He was the heir to the Sterling shipping fortune and the founder of Sterling Dynamics. He was the host of the gala. He was the wealthiest man in Illinois, and he looked furious. But his fury wasn't wild. It was cold, controlled, terrifying. He didn't look at Gavin. He walked straight to Sarah. The crowd held its breath. Nathaniel Sterling was known for being reclusive. He rarely spoke to press, and he never, ever involved himself in petty social squabbles. He stopped in front of Sarah, ignoring the $300 Gavin was still holding out in the air like a dumbwaiter. Nathaniel's expression softened instantly. He reached out and took Sarah's hand, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of immense respect. "I apologize, Sarah," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "I got caught up discussing the new wing of the museum with the mayor. I hope you haven't been waiting long." Gavin's jaw dropped. The hand holding the cash lowered slowly. "Mr. Sterling," Gavin stammered, You know my ex-wife." Nathaniel turned slowly to face Gavin. The look he gave him was the kind of look a lion gives a particularly annoying hyena. "Ex-wife?" Nathaniel repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. "I wasn't aware of her past connections to you, Mr. Reynolds. I only know her as the most brilliant restoration artist in the country." Gavin let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Restoration artist? Sarah? She just paints over cracks, Mr. Sterling. I think you've been misled. She's nobody." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Nathaniel took a step toward Gavin. "Nobody?" He turned back to Sarah, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. He looked at her with a warmth that couldn't be faked. A warmth that made Tiffany flush with jealousy and Gavin pale with confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathaniel said, raising his voice to address the entire ballroom. The music stopped. Every head turned. "I would like to make an announcement. I have spent the last decade guarding my private life with zeal, but when you find something, someone rare, you do not hide them." He squeezed Sarah's hand. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide. This wasn't part of the plan. They were friends. He was her patron. What was he doing? "Mr. Reynolds here seems to think this woman is a rough draft," Nathaniel said, his eyes drilling into Gavin, "which is fascinating, because I intend to make her my wife." The gasp that tore through the room sucked the oxygen out of the air. "I would like to introduce you all," Nathaniel continued, "to my fiancée, the future Mrs. Sterling." Gavin dropped his whiskey glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot. The shattering of the glass was the period at the end of a sentence no one had expected. For 10 seconds, the only sound in the Palmer House ballroom was the frantic, hushed whispers of Chicago's elite, resetting their social hierarchies in real time. Waiters rushed to sweep up the shards of crystal near Gavin's patent leather shoes. He stood there, his face a mottled map of red rage and white shock. Tiffany, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, physically unhooked herself from Gavin's arm. She took a half step away, a survival instinct kicking in. To be associated with Gavin Reynolds 5 minutes ago was a power move. To be associated with him now was social suicide. "This is ridiculous," Gavin hissed, though his voice lacked its usual projection. He looked at Nathaniel Sterling, who was standing like a monolith, unbothered and serene. "Nathaniel, surely you're joking. This woman, she's barely out of debt. I know. I'm the one who put her there." The admission hung in the air. It was a tactical error born of desperation. Nathaniel didn't shout. He didn't puff out his chest. He simply adjusted his cufflinks. "Mr. Reynolds, I would advise you to choose your next words with extreme caution. My legal team is notoriously litigious when it comes to slander against the Sterling family, and as of 10 seconds ago, Sarah is family." Nathaniel turned his back on Gavin, the ultimate insult in their world, and looked down at Sarah. "Shall we?" Sarah was trembling. Her mind was a white static of panic. Fiancée? Wife? She gripped Nathaniel's arm, not out of affection, but because she felt like her knees were about to liquefy. "Walk," Nathaniel murmured, his voice low and gentle, meant only for her. "Chin up. Don't look at them. Look at the exit signs. You are the most important person in this room. Believe it." They moved through the crowd. It was like parting the Red Sea. People who had looked through Sarah 20 minutes ago were now nodding, smiling, raising their glasses in deferential toasts. Caroline Vance, who had mocked her dress, caught Sarah's eye and mouthed a desperate, "Call me!" Sarah didn't smile back. She just kept walking. They reached the lobby, and the heavy brass doors swung open. The cool Chicago night air hit Sarah's face, and she finally exhaled. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb, engine idling. The driver, a mountain of a man named Silas, held the door open. They slid into the back seat. The door thudded shut, sealing them in a cocoon of hand-stitched leather and silence. As the car pulled away, Sarah slumped against the seat, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. She turned to Nathaniel. "What?" she breathed. "Did you just do?" Nathaniel loosened his tie, the first crack in his armor she had seen all night. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I improvised." "You improvised an engagement?" Sarah's voice rose an octave. "Nathaniel, that wasn't a small lie. That was a massive life-altering declaration. Do you know what Gavin is going to do? He's going to dig. He's going to find out we've only known each other for 6 months. He's going to find out I'm just your art restorer. Sarah, breathe." Nathaniel opened the small refrigerator console and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. He poured her a glass. "First, you are not just my art restorer. You are the woman who saved the 17th century Vermeer in my study, when the Louvre's experts said it was a lost cause. You have a brilliance he never saw." He handed her the glass. His fingers brushed hers, and the contact sent a jolt through her that silenced her panic for a second. "Second," Nathaniel continued, his eyes darkening, "I couldn't stand there and watch him do that to you. I know men like Gavin Reynolds. They are bullies who thrive on the silence of bystanders. I decided not to be a bystander." "But a fiancé?" Sarah asked, taking a sip of the water. "Couldn't you have said, girlfriend? Or distant cousin?" Nathaniel let out a short, dry laugh. "Go big or go home, Sarah. Besides, girlfriend implies he still has a chance to win you back. Fiancé tells the world you're spoken for. It tells the world you are protected." He turned to look out the window at the passing city lights. "However, I apologize if I overstepped. If you want, I can release a statement tomorrow, saying it was a misunderstanding. We can say I was drunk. We can say—" "No," Sarah said. The word surprised her. Nathaniel turned back to her, eyebrows raised. Sarah thought about Gavin's face. She thought about the money clip. She thought about the $300 he had tried to hand her like she was a beggar. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like she was holding a loaded gun. "Don't retract it," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "Not yet. He's closing the Yamamoto deal next week. I know, because he bragged about it during the divorce. If he thinks I'm marrying you, he'll be terrified." "He will be," Nathaniel agreed, a slow smile spreading across his face. "The Yamamoto Group uses Sterling Logistics for 80% of their North American shipping. If they think Gavin is an enemy of mine, they won't sign that contract." "Then let's do it," Sarah said. "Let's be engaged. Just for a little while." Nathaniel looked at her. The streetlights flickered over his face, casting shadows that made his sharp cheekbones look even more severe. "Be careful, Sarah. Playing pretend with the press is dangerous. You have to commit. No flinching. I survived a divorce from a sociopath, Nathaniel, Sarah said, smoothing the silk of her vintage dress. I can handle a few photographers. Nathaniel stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I believe you can, he whispered. I believe you can handle anything. The hangover was a physical entity living inside Gavin's skull. He sat in his corner office on the 40th floor of the Reynolds and Partners building. The view of the Chicago River was usually his morning meditation, a reminder that he was a god looking down on the ants. Today the ants looked like they were marching over his grave. His phone had been ringing since 6 a.m. Page 6, the Chicago Tribune, TMZ. Even the Wall Street Journal had left a voicemail, though they framed it as a business inquiry regarding the Sterling merger rumors. Stop pacing, Gavin. You're making me dizzy. Benedict Cole sat on the leather sofa, scrolling through an iPad. Benedict was 60, bald, and had the moral compass of a great white shark. He was Gavin's fixer, lawyer, and occasionally his babysitter. It's a lie, Ben, Gavin snapped, pouring himself a coffee he didn't want. It has to be. Sarah? Engaging Nathaniel Sterling? It's impossible. She buys her groceries with coupons. She drives a Honda that sounds like a lawnmower. How did she even meet him? Apparently, Benedict said, reading from a tablet, she was hired to restore the Sterling family's private collection 6 months ago. She's been in and out of his estate for half a year. Gavin froze. She was working for him. Why didn't I know this? Because you didn't ask, Benedict said dryly. You were too busy hiding your assets in the Caymans and buying Tiffany that condo in the Gold Coast. You stopped tracking Sarah's movements the day she signed the papers. Gavin slammed the mug down. Coffee sloshed onto his mahogany desk. She's doing this to spite me. She knew I'd be at the gala. She set this up. If she did, she's smarter than you gave her credit for, Benedict muttered. But we have a bigger problem than your bruised ego, Gavin. What? The Japanese. Yamamoto. Gavin felt a cold stone drop in his stomach. What about them? They called an hour ago. They're putting the acquisition on hold. On hold? Gavin roared. We've been negotiating for 8 months. The papers are ready to sign on Friday. Mr. Yamamoto is old-fashioned, Benedict explained. He values harmony. He saw the video, Gavin. Someone recorded your little outburst at the gala. It's on TikTok. It has 3 million views. The hashtag is #BillionaireBurn. Benedict turned the iPad around. There was a shaky video of Gavin holding out the cash to Sarah, looking sneering and cruel, followed by Nathaniel sweeping in like a dark knight. Yamamoto thinks you're volatile, Benedict said. And worse, he thinks you are an enemy of Nathaniel Sterling. Yamamoto needs Sterling's ports for his distribution. He isn't going to get into bed with a man who is at war with his shipping partner. Gavin sank into his chair. He felt the walls closing in. The deal was worth $50 million to him personally. If it fell through, the firm would survive. But his reputation would be gutted. The board would vote him out as CEO. Fix it, Ben, Gavin whispered. I can't fix this, Benedict said, standing up and smoothing his suit. There is only one person who can fix this. Who? Sarah. Gavin looked up, appalled. You want me to ask her for help? I want you to beg her, Benedict corrected. You need to make peace. Publicly. You need her to tell Sterling to call off the dogs, and you need her to tell Yamamoto that you two are on good terms. Friendly exes. Co-parenting. Well, you don't have kids, but that vibe. Gavin ground his teeth so hard he thought they might crack. I'd rather drink bleach. Then start looking for a new job, Benedict said, heading for the door. I hear Starbucks is hiring. Maybe Sarah can give you a referral. She knows what it's like to work for a living. Benedict slammed the door, leaving Gavin alone with his reflection in the window. Gavin stared at himself. He saw the fear in his own eyes. He hated Sarah for this. He hated her with a passion that burned hot and bright, but he loved money more. He picked up his phone. He still had her number blocked. He unblocked it. His thumb hovered over the call button. He didn't call. Instead, he sent a text. "Sarah, we need to talk. Urgent business matter regarding the settlement. I have something for you." Dinner? The Drake. Tonight. 8 p.m. He knew she would come. He had baited the hook with the one thing she still cared about, the settlement. He had hidden things, and she knew it. If he hinted he was ready to come clean, she would show up. And when she did, he wouldn't beg. He would bargain. He would find the crack in her armor and pry it open until the whole engagement fell apart. The Churchill Room at the Drake Hotel was the kind of place where Chicago's secrets were traded over single malt scotch and rare steaks. It was a cavern of dark mahogany, hunter green velvet, and shadows deep enough to hide 1,000 sins. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and the low hum of power being brokered. Gavin Reynolds sat in a high-backed booth in the far corner, a location he had specifically requested for its privacy. He checked his Rolex for the 4th time in 2 minutes. 8:05 p.m. She was late. Old Sarah was never late. Old Sarah would have been there at 7:45 p.m., anxiously checking her phone, terrified of upsetting his schedule. But the woman he was waiting for today was an unknown variable. Gavin took a heavy sip of his Macallan 25. The amber liquid burned his throat, but it did little to settle the acid churning in his stomach. The last 24 hours had been a hallucination. The viral video, the frozen stares from his partners, the call from Benedict Cole telling him that Mr. Yamamoto was reconsidering the synergy of their merger. Gavin needed a win. He needed to reassert dominance. He had convinced himself that the display at the gala was just theatre, a lucky strike by a desperate woman. Sarah was soft. He had spent 6 years moulding her, chipping away at her spine until she was pliable. He just needed to find the right pressure point, and she would fold. She always folded. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open. Gavin prepared his opening line, something cutting, something to remind her of her place, but the words died in his throat. Sarah Mitchell did not walk into the room. She glided. Gone was the nervous shuffle he remembered. She moved with a fluid, terrifying grace. She was wearing a cream-colored Chanel tweed suit that screamed old money, tailored to within a millimeter of her life. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun during their marriage, was blown out in soft, expensive waves that caught the dim light. But it was her face that stopped him. Her expression was bored, not angry, not scared. Bored. She approached the table, the maitre d' pulling out her chair with a reverence Gavin usually had to pay for. "Gavin," she said, her voice cool and level. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't smile. She sat down, placing a small, beaded clutch on the white tablecloth. "Sarah," Gavin managed, fighting to regain his footing. He forced a smile that felt like it was stretching tight skin. "You look expensive. I see Sterling's credit card has a high limit." Sarah ignored the jab entirely. She signaled the sommelier with a subtle lift of her finger. "The Pinot Noir, the 98 Domaine Sereine. Leave the bottle." She turned her gaze back to Gavin. "And put it on this gentleman's tab. He owes me for the last 6 years." Gavin bristled. The waiter poured the wine, the dark red liquid swirling in the crystal glass. Gavin waited for the staff to retreat before leaning in, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial hiss. "Let's cut the theatrics, Sarah. We both know why you're here." "I'm here because you texted me claiming there was an urgent business matter regarding our settlement," Sarah said, taking a slow sip of wine. She looked at him over the rim of the glass, her eyes sharp. "I assume this is about the art assets you claimed were lost in the move. Or perhaps the jewelry appraisal you forgot to file?" "It's about reality," Gavin snapped. "I know what you're doing. This charade with Nathaniel Sterling. It's cute. Really it is. It's a nice little revenge fantasy. But we both know it's not real." Sarah set her glass down. The clink against the table was the only sound in their corner. And why is that, Gavin? Because, Gavin leaned back, crossing his arms, feeling a surge of his old confidence. Nathaniel Sterling is a titan. He eats countries for breakfast. You're a librarian with a paintbrush. You're boring, Sarah. You're plain. You have no killer instinct. A man like that needs a lioness, not a house cat. He watched her face, waiting for the flinch, waiting for the tears to well up. That was always the pattern. He would insult her, she would cry, he would comfort her, and he would win. But Sarah didn't cry. She touched the ring on her left hand. The diamond was massive, an Asher-cut stone that seemed to generate its own gravity. It caught the candlelight and threw rainbows across the table, dazzling Gavin's eyes. "You think I'm plain," Sarah repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "You spent 6 years telling me I was lucky you married me, that I was uninteresting, that I was a surplus requirement." "I was just being honest," Gavin shrugged, mistaking her calmness for submission. "I tried to improve you. I tried to give you ambition. But you were always content to just exist. That's why I had to look elsewhere. That's why Tiffany happened. She has fire." "Tiffany left you this morning, didn't she?" Sarah asked casually. Gavin stiffened. "That's temporary. She's emotional." "She's practical," Sarah corrected. "And so am I. So let's get to the deal, Gavin. You didn't bring me to the most expensive restaurant in the city just to insult my sex life. You want something." Gavin ground his teeth. He hated how quickly she had cut to the chase. "Fine. The Yamamoto deal. It's stalling. They saw the video of the gala. They think I'm unstable. They think I'm an enemy of the Sterling Empire." "You are an enemy of the Sterling Empire," Sarah noted. "I need you to fix it," Gavin hissed, leaning over the table, his sweat starting to show on his forehead. "I need you to issue a public statement. Tomorrow. Tell the press that we are on good terms. Tell them that the incident at the gala was an inside joke. Tell them we are co-parenting our shared assets. Whatever, just make me look good." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You want me to lie to save your $50 million merger?" "Yes," Gavin said. "And in exchange, I'll give you the lake house." The air in the booth seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The lake house?" Sarah asked softly. "The property on Lake Geneva? The one you swore under oath 3 times that you had sold to a shell company in Panama 2 years ago? The one you claimed was out of your control?" Gavin waved his hand dismissively. "I still control the trust. I never sold it. I just moved the deed around to keep it out of the divorce settlement, so your blood-sucking lawyer couldn't touch it. It's standard practice, Sarah. Everyone does it." "So you admit it?" Sarah pressed, her voice slightly louder now. "You admit you hid the asset. You committed perjury in family court." "Who cares about family court?" Gavin laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "It's a game, Sarah. I won. I hid the lake house. I hid the Cayman accounts, too. There's $3 million sitting in an offshore fund called Blue Horizon that you never even sniffed. I'm smarter than you. I always have been. That's why you're going to take the house, issue the statement, and go back to playing pretend with your billionaire before he gets bored of you." He sat back, satisfied. He had played his ace. He had offered her the one thing she had cried over losing. She would take it. She had to. Sarah stared at him. For a long moment she didn't move. Then a slow, sad smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of defeat. It was a smile of finality. "You're right, Gavin," she said softly. "You were always smarter than me when it came to lying. But you're not smarter than the man sitting behind that screen." Gavin frowned. "What?" Sarah shifted her gaze to the decorative Japanese folding screen that separated their private nook from the service corridor. "You can come out now." Gavin spun around in his chair. The screen was pushed aside. 2 men stepped into the dim light of the booth. The first was Nathaniel Sterling, He looked like a thundercloud poured into a bespoke navy suit. His jaw was set so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. His eyes were fixed on Gavin, with a cold, predatory intensity that made Gavin's breath hitch. The second man was shorter, balding, wearing thick spectacles and holding a small, high-fidelity digital recorder. Gavin recognized him instantly, and his blood turned to ice. It was Frank D'Amico, the forensic Grim Reaper, the most feared auditor in Illinois. "Did you get that, Mr. D'Amico?" Nathaniel asked, his voice low and dangerously calm. "Crystal clear, mister." "Sterling," Frank said, adjusting his glasses and tapping the device. "Admission of perjury regarding the Lake Geneva property. Specific admission of the Blue Horizon Cayman accounts. Admission of fraud during divorce proceedings. And as a bonus, attempted bribery. It's extremely comprehensive." Gavin stood up so fast his chair knocked against the wall. This is illegal! You can't record me! This is entrapment!" "Sit down, Gavin," Sarah said, her voice cutting through his panic like a whip. "It's not entrapment. And it's not illegal." Nathaniel stepped closer, looming over the table. "Illinois is a two-party consent state for telephone recordings. But this," he gestured to the crowded restaurant beyond their booth, "this is a public space. There is no expectation of privacy when you are shouting your crimes loud enough for the busboys to hear." Gavin looked around wildly. The diners at the nearby tables were looking at him. He realized, with a sickening lurch, that he had raised his voice. I was joking," Gavin stammered, sweat now pouring down his face. It was negotiation tactics. Bluffing. "Save it for the judge," Frank D'Amico said, slipping the recorder into his briefcase. "I'm sending a digital copy of this file to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and Judge Henderson's chambers in exactly 10 minutes. I suggest you call Benedict Cole. He's going to need a very large retainer." Gavin looked at Sarah. He looked for the weak woman he had dominated for 6 years. He looked for the wife he could bully. She wasn't there. "Sarah," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, this will ruin me. I'll give you the money. I'll give you half the Cayman account. Just tell them to delete it." Sarah stood up. She smoothed the front of her Chanel jacket. She looked at the man who had made her feel small for so long, and she realized he wasn't a monster. He was just a small, greedy man in a suit that cost more than his soul. "I don't want your stolen money, Gavin," she said. "I just want you to know that I was never boring. I was just unhappy." Nathaniel stepped forward. He reached for the glass of expensive Pinot Noir Sarah had barely touched. He looked at Gavin, his eyes dark with contempt. "You called her plain," Nathaniel said, his voice a low growl. "You called her a house cat. You have no idea what you threw away." Nathaniel poured the wine onto the floor, directly over Gavin's polished Italian leather shoes. The red liquid splashed and stained the leather, a permanent mark. "The Yamamoto deal is dead," Nathaniel said. "I spoke to Mr. Yamamoto an hour ago. Sterling Logistics will not service any contracts signed by a CEO under federal investigation for fraud. You're done, Reynolds." Nathaniel offered his arm to Sarah. His demeanor shifted instantly from terrifying to tender. "Ready, my love? I know a place in the West Loop that serves burgers and plays jazz. Much better atmosphere. Less vermin." "I'd love that," Sarah said, taking his arm. The warmth of his body against hers was grounding. They turned and walked away. "Sarah!" Gavin screamed after them, ignoring the stares of the entire restaurant. "You can't do this! You're nothing without me! Nothing!" Sarah didn't even break stride. She walked out of the Churchill room, through the lobby, and into the cool night air. As the valet brought around the car, a simple, understated Mercedes sedan this time, Sarah felt a trembling start in her hands. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her lightheaded. Nathaniel noticed immediately. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into him, wrapping his arms around her shoulders, shielding her from the wind and the world. "You were incredible," he murmured into her hair. I've sat across from warlords who had less composure than you just had." Sarah let out a shaky laugh, looking up at him. "I had backup. I couldn't have done it without you." Nathaniel looked down at her. The streetlights reflected in his eyes, which were searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sarah," he started, and his voice lost its command, replaced by a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Back there. When he said our engagement was fake, and I had to sit there and listen to him say it." "It's okay," Sarah said softly. "We got what we needed." "No," Nathaniel shook his head. He looked terrified. "It's not okay. Because I realized I hated hearing it. I hated hearing him call it a charade." He paused, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "What if," Nathaniel whispered, the billionaire tycoon suddenly looking like a shy boy, "what if I don't want it to be pretend anymore?" The question hung in the air of the Drake Hotel lobby, suspended like dust motes in a sunbeam. "What if I don't want it to be pretend anymore?" Sarah looked at Nathaniel. For the first time, she wasn't looking at the billionaire, or the client, or the savior who had just dismantled her ex-husband's life with the precision of a surgeon. She was looking at a man who was terrified of rejection. His hands, usually so steady when handling million-dollar antiquities, were clenched at his sides. Sarah felt a reflex of panic. Her instinct, honed by years of Gavin's subtle conditioning, was to run, to say, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm broken. I'm baggage. I'm a project." But then she remembered the look on Gavin's face in the restaurant. She remembered the feeling of the ring on her finger, not the weight of the diamond, but the weight of the protection it represented. "Nathaniel," Sarah said, her voice quiet amidst the bustle of hotel guests, "you just staged a hostile takeover of my life. You lied to the press. You destroyed a man in a public restaurant, and now you're asking if I want to date you." Nathaniel winced slightly. "When you put it like that, I sound like a sociopath." Sarah smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "You sound like a man who gets what he wants. But I'm not a painting, Nathaniel. You can't just buy me at auction." "I know." Nathaniel stepped closer. The scent of sandalwood and rain that clung to him was intoxicating. "I don't want to buy you, Sarah. I want to know you. I've watched you work for 6 months. I've seen you treat a damaged canvas with more tenderness than most people treat their children. I've seen you hum when you're mixing pigments. I've seen the way you bite your lip when you're focusing. I didn't help you tonight because I hated Gavin. I helped you because I couldn't stand the thought of anyone making you feel less than magnificent." He reached out, his fingers hovering near hers. "I'm asking for a chance. A real one. No cameras. No contracts. Just dinner, and maybe a conversation that doesn't involve lawyers." Sarah looked down at his hand. She took it. "Okay," she whispered, "but we take it slow. I'm still restoring myself." Nathaniel squeezed her hand. "I have all the time in the world." The fall of Rome. While Sarah and Nathaniel were beginning something delicate and new, Gavin Reynolds' life was ending. The destruction was swift, brutal, and public. Frank D'Amico, the forensic accountant, was as good as his word. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the recording of Gavin's confession was in the hands of the presiding judge of the Cook County Family Court. By 10 a.m., the IRS had frozen Gavin's personal assets pending an audit of the Panama shells. But the real blow came from the business world. Mr. Yamamoto, true to his code of honor, publicly announced that he was severing all ties with Reynolds and Partners due to ethical incompatibilities. The stock price of Gavin's firm plummeted 14% in a single afternoon. The board of directors, sensing blood in the water, called an emergency meeting. By 4 p.m., Gavin was voted out as CEO. He was escorted out of the building by security, the same security guards he had refused to give a Christmas bonus to for 3 years running. And Tiffany? When Gavin returned to the penthouse he had bought for her, the one leveraged against assets he no longer had access to. He found the closets empty. There was a note on the granite island, written on the back of a dry cleaning receipt. Gav, Benedict called. Said you're broke. I can't do broke. Good luck with the IRS. Tatios. Gavin sat on the floor of the empty apartment. He had his custom suit, his Rolex, which he would soon have to sell, and his pride. But as he sat there in the silence, he realized that pride was a very cold blanket. He had tried to shame Sarah, to show the world she was nothing without him. Instead, he had shown the world exactly who he was, and the world had decided it didn't like what it saw. The quiet after the storm. 3 months later. The media storm had been intense. For weeks, the paparazzi had camped outside Sarah's studio apartment. The headlines were relentless. Cinderella and the Shipping King. The billionaire's secret muse. Who is Sarah Mitchell? Nathaniel had offered to move her into his estate immediately, behind the gates and the security teams. But Sarah had refused. If I move in now, she had told him, I'm just the girl you rescued. I need to be Sarah Mitchell, the artist, not Sarah Mitchell, the fiancée. So she stayed in Rogers Park. She dealt with the cameras. She learned to walk with her head high, ignoring the questions about her dress size or her ex-husband. She finished her restoration projects. She paid her own rent. And every Friday night, a black sedan, not a Rolls-Royce, but a humble Mercedes, would pick her up. They went to hole-in-the-wall jazz clubs where no one knew who Nathaniel Sterling was. They went to late-night diners where they ate blueberry pancakes at midnight. They walked along the freezing lakefront, bundled in coats, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that Nathaniel hated lobster, ironic given his shipping empire. She learned he played the cello, but only when he was sad. She learned that he was lonely, despite the army of staff that surrounded him, and Nathaniel learned that Sarah was funny, wickedly, dryly funny. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, and that her fragility was actually a profound empathy for broken things. They were falling in love, not the flashbulb love of the gala, but the quiet, enduring love of a foundation settling into the earth. But the fake engagement was still the official narrative. The ring was still on her finger, a shield against the world, the exhibition. The turning point came in the spring. The Sterling Foundation was hosting the unveiling of the restored Vermeer, the painting Sarah had spent 8 months bringing back to life. It was a massive event. The Art Institute of Chicago was involved. The international press would be there. Sarah stood backstage, her hands shaking. This was her work, her professional debut on the world stage. You look terrified, Nathaniel said, appearing beside her. He was wearing a tuxedo, looking as devastating as ever, but his eyes were soft. I am, Sarah admitted. What if they don't like it? What if they say I only got the job because I'm sleeping with the boss? Nathaniel laughed. Sarah, you finished the restoration before we started dating. The work speaks for itself. And if anyone says otherwise... His eyes flashed with that familiar, dangerous spark. I'll buy their newspaper and fire them. Don't you dare! She swatted his arm. Ready? He offered his arm. Ready? They walked out onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The applause was polite, curious. Then the curtain was drawn back. The painting, the girl with the letter, sat on the easel. It was luminous. The colors, once dull and grey with centuries of grime and varnish, sang with life. The light in the painting seemed to glow from within. It was a masterpiece of restoration. A collective gasp went through the room. Then the applause changed. It wasn't polite anymore. It was thunderous. It was genuine. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She looked out at the crowd. She saw critics nodding. She saw museum curators whispering excitedly. She saw Caroline Vance, her old friend, looking at her with awe instead of pity. She had done it. She wasn't Gavin's ex. She wasn't Nathaniel's charity case. She was Sarah Mitchell, master restorer. Nathaniel leaned down to her ear. I told you, magnificent. The real proposal. Later that night, after the champagne had been drunk and the donors had gone home, Sarah and Nathaniel sat in the empty gallery, just the two of them and the Vermeer. Sarah had taken off her heels. She was sitting on a velvet bench, looking at the painting. "It's strange," Sarah said. "I spent so much time fixing her. I feel like she's part of me." "She is," Nathaniel said. He was standing behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You saved her." He walked around the bench and stood in front of her. He looked nervous again. "Sarah," he said, "I have a confession." "Oh no," she teased. "Did you buy another country?" "No." He didn't smile. He reached into his pocket. "The ring you're wearing. The Asker cut." Sarah looked at the diamond on her hand. "The family heirloom. Your grandmother's." "That was a lie," Nathaniel said. Sarah froze. "What?" "My grandmother didn't leave me any jewelry," Nathaniel said. "I bought that ring the morning of the gala. I picked it out specifically for you. I told you it was a prop because I knew you wouldn't accept it otherwise. I told you it was fake so you wouldn't feel the pressure of it being real." Sarah stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "But it wasn't a prop to me," Nathaniel continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for a single second. When I put that ring on your finger in the ballroom, I made a vow to myself. I vowed that I would spend the rest of my life trying to be the man who deserved to keep it there." He knelt. It wasn't like the gala. There were no cameras. There was no crowd. There was no Gavin to defeat. There was just a man, stripping away his armor, offering his heart to the only woman who knew how to handle fragile things. "Nathaniel," Sarah breathed. "Sarah Mitchell," Nathaniel said, taking her hand. "I don't want to play pretend anymore. I don't want a fiancée for the cameras. I want a partner for the quiet moments. I want the woman who fixes the cracks in the world. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Sarah looked at the man who had given her back her dignity, and then, patiently, given her the space to find her own strength. She slipped the ring off her finger. Nathaniel's face fell. He looked devastated. Then Sarah smiled. She handed the ring to him. "You have to put it on properly," she said. "You have to ask me without the lie." Nathaniel let out a breath that sounded like a laugh and a sob. He took the ring. His hands were shaking. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, "will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, "I will." He slid the ring back onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It always had. 2 years later. The headline in the Chicago Tribune read, "Sterling Mitchell Wedding, a Private Affair." There were no photos of the ceremony. It had been held in the garden of the lake house, the one Gavin had tried to hide, which Sarah had legally reclaimed and then promptly sold to buy a cottage on the coast of Maine. Gavin Reynolds saw the headline from the break room of the mid-level logistics firm, where he now worked as a compliance officer. It was a grey cubicle job. His wages were garnished by the IRS. He drove a used Toyota. He was no longer the king of Chicago. He was just a man who had flown too close to the sun and gotten burned by his own reflection. He crumpled the newspaper and threw it in the trash. In Maine, Sarah sat on the porch of the cottage, watching the ocean. She was wearing a paint-stained sweater. Inside, Nathaniel was on a conference call, negotiating a merger, but he was watching her through the window. She wasn't fixing broken things anymore. She was painting her own originals. She looked down at her hand. The diamond caught the sunlight. But it wasn't the diamond that made her smile. It was the simple gold band nestled next to it. She picked up her brush and turned back to the canvas. She was finally painting her own future. And it was a masterpiece. And that is how Sarah Mitchell went from being a discarded, rough draft to the author of her own destiny. Gavin Reynolds learned the hard way that when you try to bury someone, you better check if they're a seed first. He thought he could shame her into silence, but he only amplified her voice. In the end, the best revenge wasn't the billionaire, or the money, or the status. The best revenge was Sarah realizing that she never needed Gavin's validation to be valuable. She was a masterpiece all along. She just needed the right lighting to see it. So the next time someone tries to make you feel small, remember Sarah. Remember that your worth isn't determined by who leaves you, but by who and what you choose to become after they're gone. Wow, what a roller coaster, right? I honestly got chills when Nathaniel dropped the rough draft line. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and karma hitting hard, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button right now. It helps the channel so much and tells YouTube you want more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, do you think Gavin deserved an even worse punishment, or was losing his status enough? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your take. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss a new story. We upload brand new dramas every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching. And remember, the best stories are the ones where the good guys win. See you in the next video.